They're gone for continuing medical education. No, they're gone for continuing education. I mean, maybe she did. They were supposed to be gone. Hey, bud. Hey there. Hey, to the north. Would you like to come sing? He's got the whole world at the sing.
No.
Do that? You want to sing?
I think you will have to.
All right, you want to come sing? You gotta have to help me because I'm probably gonna mess this song up because the music is all weird.
I want to do it.
All right. Parents are getting in town tomorrow. Visit. The Whitesides, their dog got out, and they're coming back, I think, September, early September. The dog here got out of that. So. Yeah. Yeah, it was being eaten by five vultures and 5-year-old going to check on it, all excited to see the cat. Really bad. No. Have you talked to them? Did you know that still has them? I haven't talked to them since we checked. That's all good. He's a black lab. There's nothing else that looks great. Father God, we're thankful that we can come before you in prayer, and thankful for what Christ has done for us. Sing with assurance that you are in control of all things, and that you have truly paid the price that we could never pay, that we stand before you recipients of your grace. And we pray that you help us to follow you as grateful recipients. Pray that you strengthen each of us here tonight, and help us to follow after you well, and learn and grow together, and for this fellowship. It's great that it would be an encouragement to all. Pray for Brad and Mary as they're away for continuing education. Hope that to go well as they travel. Pray for Kit and Stephen as they are ready to welcome this new child. And just pray that that would all go smoothly, and that you help Mom and Dad and Owen and Lucy to transition to having a new sibling and a new child and sibling. Lord, we pray for my sister-in-law's coworker who has this grim diagnosis, and you pray for miraculous healing. And if that be your will, Lord, then we ask that you would act and help her to experience your wonderful power over sin and death and disease and all the things that can go wrong in our bodies. And Lord, if that's not your will, we just pray that she would, first of all, know you, that she would be surrounded by people who can encourage her, comfort her, especially be surrounded by any believers in her life. Pray that they would just be there for her, agree with her, and minister to her in this difficult time. We're grateful for the Whitesides as they're dealing with the loss of one pet and hoping not another. Pray that Ben would be recovered. You help them with that as they deal with this from a distance. Lord, thank you for family and for the gift of my parents coming in, and just pray that would be a good visit, and that they'd have a wonderful time, and that Lauren's parents would as well as they come in for his birthday. Just thank you for the gift of family that you've given us. Be with us, Lord, now as we apply our minds to your word and what it has for us and how it should have us live in this interesting cultural moment that we find ourselves in. Pray this in Christ. Amen. All right, well, need a volunteer? Lloyd, Galatians 2:20. Galatians 2 and verse 20.
I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me.
Thank you. Well, we are coming to an end of our study of this book called Biblical Critical Theory, written by Christopher Watkin. He wrote this book that goes from Genesis to Revelation and it seeks to apply a biblical theory that seeks to understand the world in which we live and also critique it in certain ways. He takes the inspiration of that from actually way back with Augustine, who did the same thing with his City of God for the world in which he lived and the Roman Empire at the time. And Watkin notices that a lot of people do this all the time. They've got theories related to sexuality or gender or race, and all these things are proliferating in our society. People apply these theories to critique society, to understand it, and he kind of said, well, Christians have been doing this forever with the Bible. And in fact, the Bible is able to make sense of society and critique it in far more ways than any of these other theories. So he wrote this book, finished it just recently, and it was profitable, so hopefully our time thinking about it together has been as well. But we've moved from Genesis to Revelation, so we naturally come to the end of things, end times, and how that should shape us. We talked about this last time a little bit, thinking of how Revelation presents history as a story with an end, a goal, progress that we're working toward. We saw last time how the creation is growing, and the creation is something that therefore we don't say, oh, it doesn't mean anything. We're just waiting to entirely new at the resurrection. So we talked about that a little bit. But tonight we're going to conclude, and I want us to think about identity and culture. So by identity, I mean, who are we as individuals? Who are we as individuals, and what does society mean? And these are two things that are hotly debated and contended for today by the world. So as we've done throughout this study, I want to present it with two options and show why it's not this or that. It's more like, well, neither is fully right, but each has something to it. And so the two options here are, when we think of ourselves, should we conform or should we be individuals? Should we express ourselves as individuals, or should we be like some model of what we should be? Should we conform or should we be expressive individuals? So identity is vital today. We hear things like gender identity. We hear things like one of the mantras in modern society is to express your authentic self. We hear things like expressive individualism. And I want to think through those things a little bit. Ironically, when people say things like that, that they're expressing their authentic self and their gender identity, what ends up happening is they end up conforming to a larger group, right? You express yourself, your authentic self, you're unique, but then people end up inevitably in groups, like that's why there's a movement called the LGBTQIA+ movement, because they end up conforming. My point in that is not to scorn anyone, but it's just to point out that we can't have it one way. We can't say, well, I'm just going to express myself, I'm going to be my unique self. We will always be dealing with this tension between individualism and conformity. And it's no different with the sexual revolution, if you want to call it that. So of course we should ask ourselves what the Bible says about conformity or individualism, which I'll get to in just a minute. But consider another society much different from what we are seeing with the sexual revolution as it continues. Think about Islamic society, very different, right? Islamic society is kind of the opposite of the express your authentic self. It says what? Does it say express yourself, or does it say conform? It says conform, right? Islamic society is probably the best option we can think of that says conform. And a lot of people take comfort in this, and it's not so hard to see why. There is a certain amount of order, there's routine, there's expectation, and so a lot of people genuinely think that the best life is to just conform. Okay? Then there's liberal Western society, and this aspect of society, as we know, says with Fleetwood Mac, you can go your own way. And love that song, but it says, go your own way, express yourself, be your authentic self. And a lot of people take comfort in this because there's freedom in it, there's expression, there's being your authentic self. There's something freeing about it. Okay? Well, I think the Bible would tell us there is something good about each, about, let me be clear, about expressing yourself and about conforming. And there's also something bad if you think either one is the final answer. Okay? So, problem with conformity. Well, you ever think about the fact that each of us has our own unique face and personality, and as human beings, we're just all different. So conformity might sound good, it might give it routine and expectation and order, but everyone's got a unique personality, has a unique contribution to make to society. Some people are farmers, some people are wacky professors, some people are artists, some people are community organizers. And if we didn't have people expressing themselves in those ways, then society would be rather bland and non-productive. So conformity gives us order, but it also suppresses things that are good. I heard a story recently about a cancer patient, and this cancer patient became a cancer patient. Who knows all the causes, but she was convinced that part of it was because she was in a job situation where she's a very creative person, and she felt creatively blocked. She felt like she couldn't contribute in the way that she was meant to contribute, so she would run up to stress after stress after stress after stress, and eventually she was not just creatively blocked in her job, she ended up being blocked intestinally. She wasn't digesting her food well, and it was affecting her mental and emotional state, and she eventually developed cancer from this. You'll be happy to know that she is in remission. But my point is, there's a problem with conformity, though it might sound good. There's also a problem, of course, with the go your own way mentality. You might have noticed this, but people who, whether it's the hippie movement or whether it's the sexual revolution of today, if you just want to go your own way, you will find yourself in inevitable conflict with society. That's what happens. To say that you can just be yourself and express yourself, it flies in the face of certain rhythms of life that we all depend on, flies in the face of standards of justice. If everyone can do whatever they want to do, then that makes for a chaotic society, creates conflict, strife in families, and in society. So there's problems with both approaches. And so I want now to think about what the Bible would have us take away. Again, I think there's truth in both approaches, but there is also something wrong with both. And that's Galatians 2:20, which Lloyd read for us. And I remember reading this verse and having sort of an epiphany, and I think it's such a wonderful verse. I don't need to go into all the detail of it, but for now, I can just kind of point your attention to the first half, which is that Paul has conformed to Christ. And the first half is Paul has conformed to Christ, and the second is that Paul now truly lives. So I have been crucified with Christ. I've died to myself. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. In other words, he's conformed to Christ. Then he says, and the life which I now live, notice that. Like that's not something to just pass on by. He says, it's no longer I who live, but then he turns right around and he says, but now the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who, what? Loved me and gave himself up for me. And that was the glorious truth of the gospel for Paul was, when we want to be individuals, we want to express ourselves, there's nothing wrong with that, but we also have to conform if we want true peace in the world. And both of those things are good. And so Paul comes and sees Jesus and he says, aha, there's the answer. I am crucified with Christ. Why? Because, he's the king who's going to keep me in line, because that's, the right government to make the world go around the right way. No, because Christ had his best interest at heart, because he died for it. And he loved me. I love how Paul says that. He loved me. Christ actually loves us. He loves each individual person. He loves our individual faith, our individual personality. He loves when we contribute to the world. And so Paul is able to at once conform to Christ and find true freedom in that. He doesn't lose his personality at all. But he does have to surrender some of that independence. And that is, I think, where we come in as Christians in a world that is expressing itself and wanting to be individuals. We society with people who But in either case, we can, I think, meet people where they are, point out the good in their desires, and also offer them something that goes beyond that. Because inevitably the person who conforms or the person who is expressing themselves will run into problems, and they'll run into a life that is not getting them where they thought it would. And that's where the gospel comes in. But really, the problem is one of, I think, good and evil. It's one of good and evil. What does the individualist say? The individualist will tend to say, I'm basically good. Right? Basically good. What I want to do is good. That's the way I am. It's good. I'm basically good. The problem that it runs into is that part of us is bad. So it's not, I don't think the Christian response should be, we're just all bad. I don't think that's biblical at all. I think the problem is that part of us is bad. We should express ourselves. We do have a unique personality. But part of us is bad. And so that's why individualism doesn't work by itself. Conformity, however, can't work because part of us is good. And part of us needs to express ourselves. Part of us needs to show the world who we are and what we have to contribute, and contribute that to our society. And that's the joy that Paul finds in being able to live his life by faith in the Son of God who loved him. The appeal of conformity that a lot of people have, go to a Muslim nation, the appeal there is part of us is bad, but it kind of loses sight of the fact that part of us is also good. So, Paul said that he was crucified with Christ, and one person said, the more I give to thee, the more I have. That's a good way to put it. You know who said that? Juliet to Romeo. But it's something, you know, that's true in a human relationship. It's so much more the case with God. The more we give ourselves to God, the more we truly have. I want to turn your attention to Mark 8:35 as we think about this principle. It's really the heart of the gospel in so many ways. And Mark 8:35, Jesus says, for whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. One way to put that would be whoever wishes to express his individuality will lose it, but whoever loses his individuality or his life for my sake and the gospel's will save him. And the key there is not just losing your life. It's for Jesus' sake and the gospel's sake. It's like Paul realizing, oh, if I give myself up for that, then I save my life. The life that I was clinging so hard to, I actually find it. And that's the surrender that Jesus wants us to discover. So, Richard Bauckham, prominent New Testament scholar, said of this verse, he said, the receiving of one's true and eternal self is thus through giving oneself, through the giving of oneself. The receiving of one's true and eternal self is thus through the giving of oneself. So how tragic that in the world today, a lot of people are seeking what God tells them he wants to give them, their true and eternal self, refusing to give their life to find it. We have much to offer. I want to just close by thinking about culture as well. I wanted to spend most of the time on individualism, and individuality is so big today, but we can also apply the same thing to culture and society, because culture and society has the same problem. Should society all be the same? That would be to conform it. Or should societies all be different, in which case we have tons of different cultures, and the problem there is, well, how does everyone get along? How do we work together? And I want to just end by looking at a picture of this in Revelation. Again, it's not one or the other, it's the best of both. So Revelation 7 and verses 9 and 10 presents this image of people of all languages and cultures come together as one. So they haven't lost their individuality as cultures, but they've also come together in perfect unity. So it says, after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they cry out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. Every nation and tribe and peoples and tongues come together, and they all have the same voice. They all have the same voice of praise, salvation to our God and to the Lamb. They've found their true identity in Him. They haven't had to give it up. They did have to give up their lives to find their true identity. The world today, Christianity is in decline in the Western Hemisphere, but I think we should keep in mind that Christianity is, as Watkin put it, the most radically de-centered of all the world faiths. What he means by that is, like, some religions flourish in India, and some flourish in the Middle East, and some flourish more in the West. But as he puts it, Christianity was born in the Middle East, it captured the mind and heart of Europe, spread to the Americas, and is now on decline in the West, but rapidly growing in the Far East, Latin America, China, and much of Africa. So that's what we should expect. I mean, it fills the whole earth. Christ's gospel does. Unfortunately, it's in line here, but where we are, but it appeals to everyone. It's not something that just appeals to one culture or another, and we would expect the truth of God to appeal to all people in a similar way, and it does. So, what can we take away from tonight and from this book? Hopefully, what I'd like you to take away from this book, what I've taken away from it, is that usually with the way people think about themselves and the world, there is something there that is good. There's something that's good that they've gone astray. And I think if we can understand people and really get to know them and appreciate that good that is there with them, we can also be there with them when they come to a point where they realize that their life is not getting them what they want it to. And that is the call of Christian witness in our world. Well, since there's so few of us, why don't we go ahead and just